There is a version of your breakthrough that God will not release yet. Not because he's withholding it out of spite, not because you did something wrong, and not because you're being punished, but because if he gave it to you right now, in the condition you're in right at this moment, you would lose it. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's the missing piece for so many of us. We assume that when God delays, it means no, or it means that we've misheard him, or it even means that we've been disqualified somehow. But what if the delay isn't about disqualifying you at all? What if it's about developing you? Today, we're going to talk about why so many people give up right before the breakthrough. I mean, right at the very edge of what you've been praying for, believing for, and pursuing for years. By the end of this episode, I want you to walk away with a completely different understanding of what your waiting season has actually been doing. So stay with me. This one's going to hit close to home. Welcome back to Grace in the Breaking. I'm so glad that you're here today with me. If you're in a season where you're tempted to put that dream down, to close the door, to call it quits, to even walk away from the very thing that once said yes to with your whole heart, then baby, this episode has been written for you. Sit with me for the next half hour. Let's walk through this together. Let's start with something honest, because I think we need to name it before we can move past it. When God calls you into something, a new assignment, a marriage that needs restoring, a business, a ministry, a calling that you've circled for years, maybe even decades, there is usually a rush of excitement that comes with it, a holy adrenaline, a sense of finally, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. Baby, the excitement is real. It's not fake and it's not fleshy. It's for him. It's the fuel that gets you moving when logic would have kept you staying still. It's what makes you say yes when everything around you that doesn't make sense. It's what makes you take the first step off the boat onto the water that has no business holding your weight. But here's what nobody sits us down and tells us. The excitement that starts you is not the same endurance that will finish you. Those are two different graces, my friend, two different provisions. The excitement is the ignition. It's the spark. But if all you have is the spark, you will never develop the endurance. You will burn hot for a season and then flame right out when it matters most. Here's the world we live in, and I want to be honest about this because it's shaping us more than we realize. We live in a culture that has been engineered for immediate everything, immediate answers. You can Google anything and have a response in half a second, immediate delivery. You can order something today and it's on your porch tomorrow. Immediate and instant gratifications, immediate movement, immediate results. And without even realizing it, baby, that has trained our expectations of God. That he's an instantaneous God, that he's a genie in the bottle. We've absorbed a belief that if God calls us to something, the fruit should show up in a similar timeline, fast, visible, immediate. So when the initial excitement fades, and it will fade, that's not a sign of failure. That's just what happens to every emotion over time. And the fruit, it just hasn't arrived yet, so we start to panic. We assume something went wrong, and we start to wonder if we misheard him entirely. Is this resonating with you? And this right here is exactly the moment that so many people quit. Not because God has failed us, not because he's left us, but because we expected a sprint and we're actually in a marathon. Let me tell you something. Why does God let us wait? Let me back up. I want to plant something deep in your spirit today because I believe there is a truth that changes everything. Too often, it is during the waiting, not after it, that God's best work is being done. Not the visible work, the invisible work, the work inside of us, the transformation from the inside out. Let's look at Joseph for a moment because I think his story is the clearest blueprint in all of Scripture for what we're talking about. Joseph had a dream at 17 years old. God shows him, clearly, unmistakable, that he is going to rise into a position of authority. His own brothers are going to bow to him. That was his promise. That was his vision according to Genesis 37. But look what happens between the dream and the fulfillment. He was literally thrown into a pit by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused in Potiphar's house. He was thrown into prison for a crime he didn't even commit. Forgotten by the cupbearer he helped for 2 additional years after he was already forgotten once. And here's the verse that I want you to hold on to, Psalms 105, verse 17 through 19. It says, God sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with fetters. He was laid in irons until the time that his word would come to pass. And then this phrase, the word of the Lord tried him. Not blessed him yet, tried him, tested him. The waiting itself was doing something. The pit, the false accusation, the prison, that wasn't a detour from the promise, friends. That was the process that built the man who could actually carry the weight of that promise, who could actually steward and keep the weight of that promise. Because think about what Joseph was actually being prepared to steward, baby. It wasn't just a title, not just authority. He was being prepared to manage a famine that would determine entire nations if they survived or they starved. He was being prepared to forgive the brothers who betrayed him without a bitter heart, without revenge, without using his newfound power to settle an old score. His heart had stayed soft. He was being prepared to be trustworthy with his resources, with his power, with his information, and with his mercy. If God had given Joseph the palace at 17, while he was still arrogant enough to wave his dream in his brothers' faces without wisdom, still immature enough to handle it all, the very power that would save nations one day, it would have crushed him, and everyone under his authority would have perished. This is what I mean when I say God isn't working on the circumstances while you wait. He's actually working on you. He's stretching your faith. He's developing your capacity, and he's stabilizing your character. So that when the fullness of the promise comes, you don't just survive it. You steward it. You multiply it. The way Jesus trained up Joseph to multiply the grain for the entire region during the 7 years of famine. Here's a piece that I think that we miss the most. You can receive a promise prematurely and you can lose it. Not because God has changed his mind about you, but because the foundation with him wasn't finished being built. And the promise outgrew what you actually had the capacity to carry. I want you to sit with that and hear that again. The promise outgrew what you actually had the capacity to carry. Baby, you can have the oil and still not have the vessel strong enough to hold it. That's what Luke 16:10 is pointing out when it says, whoever is faithful in the little will be faithful in much. Faithfulness with much doesn't start when the much arrives. It starts in the small, hidden, unglamorous seasons, the ones that nobody's watching, the ones that don't feel like breakthrough at all. Now, baby, here's where it gets painful, because this is where so many of us, myself included, get stuck. We get impatient. And then we let the impatience rise up. We start listening to a different voice than the one that gave us the promise in the first place. That's why I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, all the time, you better take those thoughts captive. You are no longer living in a time in this world where you can be passive with those thoughts. You must command them to get out and get behind you in the name of Jesus. Here's the thing about the enemy. He's not usually bold enough to walk up and tell you to abandon your faith in God altogether. That would be too obvious. No, ma'am, no, sir. He's far more subtle than that. He doesn't come with a roaring lion in a particular moment. He comes as a whisper, dressed up as a reasonable doubt. Maybe you heard that wrong. Maybe that wasn't really God. Maybe that was just wishful thinking. Look how long it's been. If this were really from him, wouldn't it have happened by now? Maybe it's time to be realistic and just move on. Have you heard those things before? Have they made you pause? Have they made you stop moving forward? Instead of pressing forward, instead of resting in him and asking the one question that could change everything, God, what are you actually expecting of me right now in this season of waiting? We let that whisper win. We let that enemy whisper in our ear and we give up. And here's the tragedy. We usually give up right as the last test begins. So let's go back to Exodus 14, the Red Sea. Israel didn't quit back in Egypt under the whip, under the generations of slavery. They endured that. But look at where they nearly broke. Exodus 14:10. When the sea in front of them, Pharaoh's army closing in from behind, they cried out to Moses. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die here. I want you to listen. Let's read that again. They were closer to the miracle of their entire generation. A sea about to split into two and an army about to be swallowed by the very waters they feared. Than they ever had to have been in their lives. And that is exactly the moment they wanted to turn around and go back to slavery. Same thing with Elijah in 1 Kings 19. He didn't quit before Mount Carmel. When he stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal, he didn't quit when he had to trust God publicly with his life on the line in the front of the entire nation watching to see if God was real. He quit after the fire fell from heaven, after the impossible had already happened, because one threatening message from Jezebel, and this man who had just witnessed the greatest single display of God's power in the Old Testament, sat down under a tree and literally asked God to let him die. Wow. Do you see the pattern now? Baby, that resistance is not random. It is not evenly distributed across your journey. It concentrates. It shows up strongest right before the last door opens. Because the enemy, He knows exactly what's on the other side of your obedience, even when you don't. This is why James 1 tells us to avoid trials. It tells us to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, because the testing of our faith produces patience, and lets patience have her perfect work, so that we may be complete, lacking nothing, not despite the trial, but through it. Romans 5 says something similar. Tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. That's the order. You cannot skip a step in that chain and still end up with the same hope on the other side. Y'all, I want to share that when I started this ministry and Lord had told me to stop corporate and all of the things, the excitement had overtaken me. I didn't have all the answers. I just knew what God told me. And let me tell you how many voices, familiar voices raised up, family voices, close friends, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. What I look back now, that those were implementations of seeds of doubt that the enemy was planting, so that it would keep me in a state of worry, so that it would keep me panicking, and it would keep me from fully moving into the abundance to which God was carrying me. It slowed me down until it didn't. I expected the magnitude to hit me all at once, that the clothing line would be successful, that the podcast would have all sorts of sponsors and be self-sustaining. All of these expectations I thought were about to happen right away. And then they didn't. And I knew I had heard God. But let me tell you something. I learned through the waiting that he was still perfecting me, not because he was punishing me, but because he had said, you will never run out of supply. Keep moving, keep building, keep walking in obedience, and you will be rewarded if you do not quit. I want to be honest about something that I walked through myself, because I think it will help you see more clearly. Again, I expected this ministry to have an immediate yield. And in my mind, the assignment, it was supposed to be the breakthrough. I thought that saying yes to the calling meant the fruit, the impact, the growth, the visible evidence would be seen right away. And this is not what happened. In the early days, there was traction. It was kind of like a tug of war, a rope. We would make steps forward and then we would take steps back. And doubt, comparison, confusion, exhaustion tried to set in. Like, let me tell you, when you look at others and how they're growing, it's easy for you to get caught up in comparison. But I want to tell you something right here. You were created to stand out. Your story, your oil is yours. It's not like anyone else's. God made you different. He created you for a specific purpose, and you're going to have to trust him. You're going to have to take his hand and walk across the water. You can't give up right before the promise. It's coming. He told you it. This is the time that he's stretching your faith. This is the time that he's developing your character, so that you understand the ebbs and flows, that you understand that patience is formed, and you understand the magnitude of what he's asked you to do. He wants you to keep it. He wants you to steward it, and he wants you to multiply it. And this is why it takes a little bit. What actually happened in the process became my breakthrough. Even though I didn't feel like it was a blessing while I was in it, it felt like I was being stretched past what I thought I could hold. There were seasons where I genuinely wondered if I had heard God correctly at all. My faith was stretched. My finances, I worried about, which affected my identity. What if they see this and I feel, who cares? Again, comparison kills. I started unfollowing people that subconsciously I was comparing my success to. If it didn't bring me joy or it brought me stress, Control, Alt, Delete, baby. Your calling isn't tied to someone else. not in their performance, not in where God has brought them, because social media is a liar. It only shows you the great times. Don't be deceived. Looking back now, I see exactly what God was doing with me in the waiting. He wasn't withholding the fruit with me out of punishment. He was building a discipline in me that I didn't have before. He was deepening that intimacy between he and I and teaching me to actually hear his voice and trust it, not just in the exciting moments, but in the mundane ones, the repetitive and the hidden ones. My discipline had to change completely. Putting myself back into a place of posture and taking care of my temple. My discipline included reading the Bible daily, being in Bible study, getting under a mentor that pushed me, corrected me, working on my body from the inside out, fueling it with a word that transforms me, and making also my body stronger with the food that I put into it, and working out daily. This is helping me to steward what is coming, what is here, that I couldn't have done back then. And here's what I want you to take from my story. If he had given me all of the fruit immediately, the way I originally expected it, I don't believe I would have had the capacity to steward it, let alone multiply it the way that I've been able to do since. I want to tell you that learning to steward, grabbing that intimacy with him, it's something that you'll never trade for something in the world. It's powerful, it's precious, and it's intimate. And I want you to know that everybody that's listening, your intimacy is going to look different. And you're going to have your own version in the waiting, but it is going to be the biggest blessing you've ever received. And before we move into how to actually walk the last test out, I want to give you a few signs that you might be standing closer to breakthrough than you realize. Closer than you've ever been before, baby. First, honey, the resistance gets louder. It does not get quieter. And if the fight against your faith is intensifying rather than fading, that's often a sign that you're moving further from the promise. It's frequently a sign that you're moving closer to it. Again, not farther. Second, old doubts and old wounds are resurfacing with new intensity. Because remember, the enemy studies you. He knows your weak points. Things that you thought you had already worked through are suddenly loud again. That's frequently the enemy trying to pull you backward into an old identity right before you step into the new one. Forget the former things, the new thing springs forth. Do you not perceive it, according to Isaiah 43:18-19? And third, you are being tempted to make permanent decisions based on a temporary feeling. Let me tell you something. Exhaustion is not a prophetic word, and weariness is not evidence that God changed his mind. It's evidence that you are human, that you need rest, and that you do not need to quit. Fourth, you keep hearing a quiet whisper to hold on just a little longer, even while your flesh has been screaming at you to give up, baby. That whisper is not your imagination. You need to pay attention to it. It's pushing you. Keep going. None of these steps mean you're falling, babe. In fact, more often than not, they mean the exact opposite. Here's the framework to walk your dream out. I need you to hear me clearly. The dream God gave you was never meant to be walked out alone in isolation and with no framework and no accountability. And it was never meant to be walked out with the wrong expectations about what the process would actually require of you. This is why I built up the Rise Up Mastermind, because Rise Up is not a coaching container. I want to be really clear about the distinction because it matters. It is a personalized roadmap for your next season, a place that you are equipped with the right framework and held accountable to actually walk the dream out instead of abandoning it in the next season. Man, we're not going to let you drop it. We're going to bust it wide open. Because inside Rise Up, we set correct expectations from the very beginning so that you're not blindsided halfway through the waiting. You're not tempted to quit at the last test because simply nobody warned you about what the season would actually require of you. You don't just get encouragement to keep going. You get actual framework for success. You get the accountability so that when the whisper comes to you to give up, there is someone standing shoulder to shoulder with you, reminding you what you already know to be true. If you've been circling a dream for years, if it started with genuine excitement and then lost momentum somewhere in the waiting, Rise Up was built for this exact moment in your story. And if you're not quite ready for that step yet, I also want you to know about the e-course, What's Keeping You Playing Small. It's available right now in the Read and Learn section of Grace in the Breaking. It's a powerful place to start identifying what has actually been holding you back from stepping fully into what God has for you before you're ready to do the full framework of Rise Up. And if you're in a season right now where the excitement has faded and the fruit hasn't shown up yet, I need you to hear this clearly. Baby, you are not behind and you are not forgotten. The devil is a liar. You are being prepared for capacity. So don't you let the enemy talk you out of that last test. Don't you rush what God is trying to perfect in you. His timing is perfect. Isaiah 60:22, in its time I will do it swiftly. So rest in him the way Elijah was allowed to rest before he received the next instruction. Ask him directly what he is expecting in you in this exact season. And then when you have the answer, baby, you keep walking it out. Honey, the promise is still yours. You hadn't lost it. Don't you dare put down one test before it arrives. Some of you are reading or listening right now are one obedience, one more surrendered week, and one more act of trust away from watching the very thing you've almost given up on come to pass. If this episode stirred something in you today, I need you to share it with a man or woman who needs to hear it. And if you are ready to walk out the dream with the right framework and the real accountability, you need to message me for the link to the Rise Up Mastermind. Until next time, friends, I need you to keep standing, keep praying, keep moving forward because grace is still writing your story, even in the waiting. Listen, friends, I love you. I know we get excited when he calls us, and the excitement isn't endurance. And in too often, the waiting season is where he does the greatest work. What God builds will last. Till next time, friends, I love you so much. Be blessed and let grace meet you right where you are. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today on Grace in the Breaking. If this episode spoke to your heart, please remember to follow, download, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement right now. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. As I close, I want to leave you with this reminder, 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. So no matter what season you're walking through, you are not alone. And there is always grace in the breaking. For more information, resources, or to connect with me, visit graceinthebreaking.com or email me at info@graceinthebreaking.com. Until next time, friends, stay rooted in faith, hold on to hope, and remember that there is grace in the breaking.